last 20 years of my life, I sailed throughout the Mediterranean Sea. Sailing needs a lot of time and money, and since I struggled large portions of my life to keep financially afloat, I pretty soon did sailing trips for customers. It was a win-win situation, since they needed a skipper and paid for it, and I could be on a sailboat and improve my skills. Many years I worked as an instructor for a sailing school, teaching people about aspects of sailboat sailing, and continued to do holiday sailing trips for people during the summertime. And I did some deliveries outside of the sailing season. During my training trips, I met many people who either were wealthy enough or just young and naive to buy their own sailboats with the intention to sail throughout the Mediterranean, across the Atlantic Ocean, or even around the world. Many of them had very little or no experience except our sailing courses. Buying a sailboat was far out of reach for me, and I had to take care of my beloved family. But still, back in my mind, I knew that I wanted to do something bigger than just bringing tourists from one anchorage to the next. But this would mean that I would have to demonstrate that I'm capable of more than just that. The Mediterranean is full of less trained hobby skippers. However, I still didn't know what exactly I wanted to do, and most importantly, how to organize that. In January of 2017, my wife and I, together we were in Iceland on vacation. It was an awesome experience. I've never seen such an astonishing landscape, and I was totally impressed. I was infected by Iceland as if it were a virus. At one day during this trip, I stood at the lighthouse of Öndverdanes, on the westernmost end of the Snæfellsnes Peninsula. It has its name from the Snæfellsjökull, which is a beautiful volcano with a white snow cap. The French author Jules Verne describes in his well-known science fiction novel from 1864, A Journey to the Center of the Earth, that at this mountain an entrance is found where one could walk to the center of the Earth. And as I stood at this lighthouse, I looked across the vast and wild Atlantic Ocean, where the swell crushed against the steep cliffs. And suddenly an inner voice told me, so it literally shouted to me, that I have to sail here with a boat. I talked to my wife about that, and she knew that I was dreaming about some bigger challenges and adventures for many years. So she said that I have to buy a sailboat and sail here. And this is where everything began. From that day, I started to get interested in high-latitude sailing. I did my personal research what it would mean to sail there and contacted a lot of people, which I found on the internet from Norway.
So what doesn't kill you will just make you to proceed the adventure, I guess. So let's go.
From Iceland and even my home country, Austria. I got many suggestions and hints what I should consider, and many of my friends and people in the Austrian sailing community found it to be a great idea. But still, I felt that many of them just thought that I'm crazy and stupid. At the time then, I still didn't know exactly where to sail and how to organize that, but I started to look for boats capable of navigating in such regions. But the biggest problem still was on one hand the question of how to finance all that, and that I would need a very long time for such a trip. And this was a reasonable problem because my wife and I, we ran a small farm in the Austrian mountains with cattle and horses, but I wasn't in a hurry and the whole plan was still not much more than an idea. We were very happy together and we loved our farm. And then after a few years, things suddenly, totally unexpected, got worse. It was the year 2020, which marks a dark year in human history, and for my wife and me, it became even worse. Due to ongoing financial pressure, I developed a mental health issue, and some unlucky coincidences fell together in 2020, which led to a complete crash of everything. Until today, I do not know what went wrong. I cannot understand how this could happen. My wife and I got divorced and we sold our farm. Although this enabled me to buy a boat, it created a deep rupture in my life and marked the beginning of developing a depression. And until today, and probably until the end of my life, I regret this more than everything else, and I was yet unable to recover from that. Several months after this catastrophe, I bought a boat, but at the same time I began to realize what happened and drifted more and more into a depression. I tried to get my wife back and wanted to rescue the whole situation, but it didn't work. Finally, I got some professional help and medication against that suffering, and it helped me a little bit. I was able to motivate myself, so I started to make plans and prepare the boat and myself for letting the lines go in the spring of 2023. Meanwhile, I had a more specific plan about what to do and where to sail, because during the last 4 to 5 years I developed the idea to sign up for the Golden Globe race, and although I was pretty confident in my sailing skills, I still had no idea about what it means to sail in solitude across the big oceans of this world. I also think about being a skipper in the Clipper race, and of course I would love to sail with an IMOCA. But since I'm from a landlocked country, I have no contact to this professional sailing world. And I first wanted to test myself in a not so remote region. My plan was to sail single-handed into the Norwegian Arctic, to hit the pack ice north of Svalbard, and then sail back again. It is a tough challenge, but still around Europe. So, in case something goes wrong, I could abort the mission and easily fly home, or get support in some country around Europe. In the second half of 2022 and the beginning of 2023 was a time of heavy preparation. Several times I reached a point where I almost aborted the project. And on the other hand, I lacked mental support since I was alone. Throughout my whole life, I was in a relationship, and I was used to talk to my wife about difficult situations and decisions. But suddenly, no one was there, and there's nobody else behind me, there is no team. And I was still suffering from the depression, although it seemed to slowly go up again. I had a boat now, and some spare money, but still had to make financial decisions thoroughly on what to buy and what not. However, I managed to go through all that and finally stood on the pier in my homeport in Croatia for a last time at the beginning of May. Together with my wife and children, we enjoyed this last weekend before my departure.
Whew. Yes, I guess this is it. I'm totally exhausted from the last days and weeks and months of preparation of all that. But I think I'm almost finished now. Just a few little things, and I have to clean up the boat. And probably tomorrow, the day after, I will start and head south first to leave the Adriatic Sea. Today or this night I will just sit here and watch a movie and relax a little bit. And oh yes, say hello to Linda. This is my companion. She will be the whole time with me and take care of me.
2 days later, 2 guests arrived, which will accompany me on this first passage. Although I planned to do a solo sailing trip, I still agreed to take them with me. I urgently needed some money, and Kathy and Sam wanted to get some experience since they had in mind to buy their own boat for a longer sailing trip. And non-stop sailing through the Mediterranean is not easy for several reasons. On one hand, the weather is always very challenging. It is a small inland sea, surrounded by Europe and Africa, and enclosed by high mountains in the north along the whole European coast. These mountains often keep colder air from the north outside until it flows across the peaks into the Mediterranean basin. And this cold air, together with the warm and moist air in the Mediterranean, is a toxic cocktail which can rapidly change the weather. The second difficulty in the Mediterranean is that it is so small that you're always somewhere close to a shore. So it's hard to avoid situations in a more severe weather where you do not want to be close to a shore. Or you have to wait until the wind turns because there's just one way out and the wind is against you. And the third difficulty is the shipping traffic. The Mediterranean is very busy because of a large portion of Europe is supplied through the southern Mediterranean coast and because of the Suez Canal. All traffic from and to Europe goes through this passage. And along the coast there's a lot of small boat traffic, partially because of the extreme tourism, at least in the high season. All that makes solo sailing challenging, at least if you want to sail long distances and not just from one anchorage to the next. So we left Malinska on the late afternoon of the 3rd of May and went for an anchorage. We needed some rest before starting this first part of the adventure. The next morning was beautiful and sunny. The trees around already started to get green. After having a breakfast and refueling the boat in the next town, we headed south into the first part of this adventure. I was very excited about everything, not knowing what all is about to happen in the upcoming months of this expedition into the Arctic. The well-known Bura was still blowing at force 5 to 6, and immediately after I set sail, the car of the Genoa track broke. This happened so quick and unexpected that I even couldn't catch this on camera. I had to react immediately since the full load of the sail was pulling on the guardrail. So I quickly furled in the Genoa and set the staysail instead. The wind eased soon and turned to northwest, and I tied a low-friction rein with a Dyneema cord to what was left of the car of the Genoa track. We sailed into a beautiful moonshine night. I had to carefully navigate between all the shoals and rocks to get to the open Adriatic Sea. Around midnight, we passed the outermost belt of the islands to the open sea. This comes with some relief for me because navigating through the Croatian islands is much more challenging than out in the open sea. There are many dangers, and although I know these islands like the back of my hand, I still have to be very careful. The next day went smooth, and after a pretty calm night, where we unfortunately had to go with the engine, we passed the island of Svetac. It is one of the little-known islands far off the typical tourist tracks. And although I already tried several times, I was unable to visit it so far. In the late afternoon, we passed the island Palagruja in the distance. It is the most remote island of the Adriatic Sea. It's pretty inaccessible, but in calm weather, it is possible to anchor there. I was able to land on Palagruja 4 years ago, and I explored this rarely visited little rocky island. It's worth coming here, but you have to choose the right weather window in a stable and calm situation, since the island lies in the middle of the Adriatic Sea and it offers no protection and just steep and rocky cliffs all around. This time I just passed the island and sadly the wind died completely, so we again motored through the night. I carefully watched the traffic of the merchant vessels. In the afternoon, some wind came up again. Unfortunately, it was from the southeast. This was expected, but it makes it more difficult to get out of the Adriatic Sea. This wind is known here as jugo. It comes from the Croatian word for south, meaning the wind of the south. It was just a light breeze, but I had to carefully watch the traffic throughout the night, since we were very close to Brindisi. It is a major ferry port in the south of Italy and it is very busy. But we made it further south and soon passed Otranto, which officially marks the end of the Adriatic and the beginning of the Ionian Sea. Unfortunately, the wind died in the evening and we had to motor again. And this dead calm lasted for the next 40 hours. We had to go with the engine along the whole foot of Italy. This was boring and nerve-wracking, but we had some visitors. These small birds seemed to be pretty exhausted and used the boat for a rest. The shore was several miles away. I used this long boring passage to repair the car of the Genoa track. I drilled a hole through the car and bolt and then fixed it with a small screw and some Loctite. Later, I made some rice with green peas and a sauce of vegetables. Meanwhile, the birds entered the boat and used the inside for their rest. There was still no wind because we were in the middle of an area where all flows converged. There was one high pressure on Eastern Europe, one over Spain, and low pressure in the south over Africa. And the result were grey clouds and a tendency for thunderstorms over the Ionian Sea. Later it cleared up a little bit and we even could see the moon. In the middle of the night we passed the Capo Spartivento, which is almost the southernmost point of mainland Italy, and we now came closer to the shore. On the next day we entered the well-known Strait of Messina, which separates Sicily from mainland Italy. We had to pass through it because it is a shorter way to pass north of Sicily instead of south. Furthermore, westerly winds were predicted in the Strait of Sicily, which would make it difficult to go west there. The weather situation was generally difficult and pretty variable, but this is typical for the Mediterranean Sea. Although it is well known for its blue water and the warm and beautiful weather during the summertime, the weather is always very challenging, specifically if you want to sail long distances and not just along the coast from one anchorage to the next. We entered the Strait of Messina, which needs more attention since there's a lot of shipping traffic. There are merchant vessels going north or south, and in between a lot of ferries are crossing between Sicily and mainland Italy. It feels like vessels from everywhere going in any direction. Suddenly, our engine dropped RPMs, but immediately came back again. This made me pretty nervous. We had to refuel anyway since we had far more engine hours than expected. So we stopped in Reggio di Calabria, and to my surprise, we had a far higher fuel consumption than expected. So there were only 30 liters out of 210 left in the tank. I think this was because the boat was heavily loaded, far more than I was used to in the past. But we made it to the gas station and continued immediately afterwards, following the Strait of Messina to the north. Finally, we passed through what I call the gate to the Tyrrhenian Sea. There are two very tall lattice towers marking this entrance. In former times, they were used to supply power to Sicily. Passing through the northern end of the strait is not always easy because of the ocean currents. At some point we had over 2 knots against us, but it dropped again. It's typically just the northernmost 5 nautical miles of the strait. Later it started to rain, but luckily some wind came up, so we could set sail. All 3 of us were pretty exhausted from this endless motoring in the calm. At the end of the day, the sun broke through a little bit and we headed into the next night. Unfortunately, in the second half of the night, the wind died again and we just drifted around in a heavy swell. The boat rolled from one side to the other. None of us could sleep really well. In the early morning hours, we decided to head for an anchorage on the island next to us. We were lucky that this island was there, in a distance just over 1 hour. So we dropped the anchor in a bay on the south side of this island called Volcano. It is the southernmost island of the Aeolian Islands. They are named after Aeolus, the ruler of the winds according to the Greek mythology. It is a group of active volcanic islands in the Tyrrhenian Sea. On one of them is the well-known Stromboli. It is an active volcano which almost always spits out some fumes and occasionally some lava. On clear days it can be seen from all around. We found a well-needed rest on the foot of the green slopes of this island. It is a very beautiful place with its dark sand. We were the only boat here. Unfortunately, it is pretty crowded during the summer season. In the afternoon, wind came up and after having some sleep we were full of energy to lift the anchor and sail further to the west. It became a wonderful day of sailing.
We're just off your port bow. I've been altering course to starboard. Could we pass port to port?
Yeah, we can. Later on alter it a little bit to start.
The next morning we passed the island of Alicudi. It is the westernmost of the Aeolian Islands. Our journey continued and the weather became more friendly. Beginning in the middle of the Adriatic Sea until the Ionian Islands, we struggled with very light winds and dead calms, but now it seems to have turned in our favor. The wind picked up. We sailed on a broad reach at first, but we were lucky because the wind veered to the north, so we made an excellent progress towards Sardinia on a beam reach. I even had to put a reef in later. It was great sailing and we went through the next night. Around noon of the 14th of May, we sailed into the Gulf of Cagliari. Finally, we arrived in the Marina Portus Caralis in Cagliari in the late afternoon. Kathy and Sam had already booked a flight back home for the next day. So I was alone, a perfect time to have a beer after this long ride.